What do I think is sexy? Nice teeth and full lips.
A cute butt.
Attitude.
Petite, slim, that's what I go for.
I go for like the tall, dark, and handsome, and accents too. Like, yeah.
Large breasts.
In Greek mythology, a single stunning face launched 1,000 ships and started the Trojan War. Centuries later, a single face can launch a war at the box office, or on the runway, or on the newsstands. Why are we still so attracted to certain patterns of flesh and bone? Is our attraction just skin deep, or is there something more profound about our insatiable desires? And who best embodies those desires, especially when the definition of masculine and feminine has begun to blur so much? In the brave new world of gender equality, some men are taking on traditional female roles. Others are bending gender beyond recognition. The sexual arena is sometimes a very public playground. We move through the world knowing that we are putting on a show.
Oh, it's definitely a performance. Sexiness is a performance. It's something you put on.
And if the performance hits all the right notes, then it's irresistible.
These preferences that we have for attractive features are very, very powerful.
And the preferences are already in place at a very early age. In the early 1990s, researchers at the University of Texas showed babies photographs of fashion models and monkeys. Guess which ones they drooled over? Not our hairy cousins. Other studies have shown that in some playgrounds, the most popular children were the most attractive children. Even our mothers are not immune. One study found that the more attractive the newborn baby, the more time their mothers spent holding them close and staring into their eyes. Whether we want to admit it or not, sexy creatures parade through life with real advantages. They earn more money, they have more partners, they're better liked by their peers and are considered more persuasive. When they're in trouble, they're more frequently helped. If you're an attractive woman, chances are you'll probably marry a richer, more educated man. And a number of American studies suggest the more attractive you are, the better treatment you'll receive in the legal system. Being sexy isn't democratic or fair. It's a struggle of the fittest, the fastest, the brightest, and the biggest. There's a fundamental reason why we struggle to make ourselves as sexy as possible, and why we're so attracted to what is sexy. Here's your answer. All our efforts to be bigger and brighter, all our desire to find the sexiest mate is fueled by the body's craving to reproduce.
Mating is perhaps the most important single decision a person can make in their life.
Psychologists argue that we never choose a mate at random. That choice is always very strategic.
Basically, by making some mate choices, our ancestors would have survived and thrived and reproduced more successfully than if they had made other choices.
Not surprisingly, men and women made different evolutionary choices because they had different needs. For our female ancestors, having a child was a huge, risky investment. With a long pregnancy, nursing for over a year, she needed to be very selective in choosing her mate.
For example, let's take an ancestral woman living 500,000 years ago, and she has a choice between man A and man B. Man A is a slacker. He doesn't like to get out. He's kind of lazy, likes to sit around and smoke weed all the time. Man B is a good hunter. He wakes up in the morning, runs out there, and hunts all day, comes back, brings home some meat. Okay, who is the woman going to be better off mating with, the slacker or the guy who's bringing home meat? Well, in terms of her survival and her children's survival, she's better off choosing that successful hunter. And so we are all the descendants of women who chose men who were resourceful.
If the resourceful, successful hunter is what women have always wanted, then men have made certain choices to fulfill that demand.
This is one of the reasons that men are so busy trying to get money. Men are quite willing to give up their personal life, their health, their safety, their spare time in order to get ahead. And if you ask them why, they'll say, well, I just want to be good at my job. But once again, from an evolutionary perspective, those men who get to the top do get more breeding opportunities.
In humans and in the animal kingdom, females around the world are attracted to health, resources, and power. And a sexy man is more than a good bet for the present. He's also insurance for the future.
Women can benefit by selecting a man who's highly attractive to other women because she will bear sons that are attractive to other women, and so her reproductive success will increase through her sexy sons.
Psychologists say this drive to bear sexy sons is part of what steers every woman to search for Mr. Right. But the search can get complicated. Researchers in Scotland and Japan found that some women were more attracted to rugged-looking men during ovulation. That is, when they were most fertile.
Executive assistant to the vice president.
But then, when they weren't ovulating, these women were more attracted to gentle-looking men. One suggestion for this discrepancy is that women want tough guy genes for their offspring, but then they want Mr. Nice to help raise the kids.
In the long term, she's looking for a mate who is a stable provider.
Every woman has to sort out her own needs for the short term and her preferences for the long term. And what do men prefer? Well, we think we know, but we might be surprised why.
This one, incidentally, to pick a shapely mamselle to compete for the Miss World title in London.
The male desire for beauty might seem selfish, but maybe men are just thinking about the preservation of the species.
The general consensus from work in the last 8 years on beauty is that beauty is a certification of health.
In other words, men aren't just chasing beauty. They're actually chasing health.
In a study of 37 societies, it was established that men really are interested in women who show signs of youth and fertility. Clear skin, bright eyes, a buoyant personality, a supple figure. The kinds of things that men realize will enable their mate to bear healthy babies. Women of all ages tend to try and keep their hair in good shape, wear makeup, wear clothing and jewelry and things that enhance their youthfulness.
One of the most powerful signs of beauty, youthfulness, and health is a glistening strand of protein.
It's an important vehicle for how we want to tell the world how we feel about sex.
Ray Ciavello has been a hairdresser for 25 years. Every day he witnesses the sexual power of hair. He says Western society has decided that long, straight hair is the most sexy.
Sleeker, more elegant line. It moves, it flows. When you shake your head, it moves. There's energy, there's life in it, there's a suggestion in it.
We're not the only mammals on the planet who care about our hair so much. Francis Burton is an anthropologist who has studied how monkeys and apes groom each other.
I have been groomed a number of times by monkeys, and it really is marvelous. I've had my hair gorgeously done by a monkey who had pineapple juice all over his hands, but anyway, and the sensation is truly extremely pleasant.
Primates spend a lot of time carefully picking parasites and dirt from each other's hair. It's thought that this bonds the animals into their tightly knit societies.
Grooming is so important to a society of primates that a monkey who's been ostracized will quickly begin to show the fact that it's not in the group. The fur becomes matted, too thick, full of ectoparasites, things of this nature. And of course, the individual being ostracized is alone and untouched and unwelcomed.
Our own fascination with hair goes back to the ancients.
A lot of Egyptian sexual fantasies seem to have a lot to do with hair. There are poems that say, you know, oh, I saw you go by the door and I hadn't quite finished my hair. Just wait a minute. Wait till the hair is done, then I'll come to you. And prayers saying, you know, well, lie down on the couch. I'll get my wig on and we'll have some fun. So hair was a big part of their sexuality.
In ancient Rome, hair was seen to be so sexually charged that women were punished with divorce for uncovering their heads. Even today, hair is still hidden away to signal chastity. Science has uncovered a hormonal link between hair and sexuality, at least for women.
There is evidence that testosterone, which is linked to sex drive and to hairiness, is a more important determinant of sexuality in women than in men. Women with a high testosterone have a higher sex drive and also tend to be a little hairier.
There are about 5 million hairs on our adult bodies. We have as many follicles as an ape, but most of our body hair is so fine that it makes us look bare-skinned. We're actually only really naked on our lips, palms, nipples, and some parts of the genitals. These areas are rich in nerve endings. But although we're all born covered in hair, certain strands stand out more than others. Only 1 in 20 women in the world is a natural blonde.
Blonde is still the color of the sex symbol. It's still the most popular color in Penthouse and Playboy centerfolds. It's also, you know, the most popular color for film stars, way over the proportion in the population.
But the blonde's connection with sex is nothing new. In ancient Rome, prostitutes used saffron to color their hair yellow. It set them apart from the dark-haired patrician ladies of society. Science doesn't know why blondes have more fun. Perhaps darker hair is a sign of waning fertility. Consider this. After a woman's first pregnancy, her hair permanently darkens just a little bit. Perhaps this is a sign that she's already moving out of her reproductive phase. Nature's way of crossing her off the bachelor's list. However, the blonde advantage may be short-lived. Natural blondes rely on a recessive gene for their light hair. New research estimates that with the way the world population is expanding, it won't be long until natural blonde genes are camouflaged by darker hair genes. In other words, natural blondes are an endangered species. And whether you're a blonde or a brunette, there's another turn-on that men find irresistible. Fat. Not this kind of fat. This kind of fat. If it falls in all the right places, fat is one of the great visible signals of femininity and fertility. After puberty, it separates the flat, straight kids from the curvy, luscious grown-ups. Women with full breasts and rounded hips are showing they've got the necessary fat to burn in order to make and feed babies.
But it's not the size that's important so much, but cues to youth are important. And so firm breasts are more desired than saggy breasts, for example. It's a cue to youth. But breasts are merely one physical signal in a constellation of many physical signals that men key in on.
Now we come to the mathematics of sexual attraction. And the doctor with all the right numbers is Devendra Singh. Judging from his studies of some 18 different countries, Dr. Singh argues that men are most attracted to a certain set of curves, specifically a certain ratio between a woman's waist and her hips.
At least all the data we have, it appears that across cultures, whether isolated tribes or not, they seem to pay attention to waist-to-hip ratio for judging attractiveness and health, and that's important.
According to his research, the ideal female waist-to-hip ratio is about 0.7. That is, when the waist is about 70% the size of the hips. In other words, an hourglass figure. It may be hard to believe, but the voluptuous Marilyn Monroe and slender Audrey Hepburn had the same waist-to-hip ratio. Even the super-thin supermodel Twiggy hit the same ratio. And this ratio seems to cut across different generations. In a multi-decade analysis of beauty queens, Dr. Singh showed that while modern beauty contestants are getting thinner, their waist-to-hip ratios are still hovering inside that attractive 0.7 zone. So these very different body types in different decades are all attractive because they're all sending out the same signal of fertility.
There was already some research done that the waist-to-hip ratio affects cardiovascular disorders, it affects diabetes, it affects cancer. That I already knew. I mean, it's a very known fact. All I was doing was to argue that if we are programmed to look at the health, then we must be paying attention to it.
The link between waist-to-hip ratios and health is backed up by a Dutch study of 500 women. The researchers found that the women who had the hourglass waist-to-hip ratio were almost twice as likely to become pregnant than those who had a more tubular waist-to-hip ratio. The connection between waist-to-hip ratios and fertility is also apparent with age. Older menopausal women tend to lose their curves. Age and fat, twists and curves, they all play into our definition of what is sexy. But there's another signal of sexual attraction that might be the most powerful of all.
What do you find sexy?
What I find sexy, women with long blonde hair.
I think eyes are sexy. Good sense of humor.
My wife.
That's smart, isn't it?
From the first flirtatious glance across a jungle, we've instinctively been attracted to the most attractive partners. These desires have shaped the course of our physical evolution.
We can ask, why does the human face look as it does? It looks very different than the faces of other apes. And the reason the human face looks as it does is because of the beauty preferences of individuals in our specific evolutionary history.
We have always preferred beauty because beauty was and is the body's way of signaling health. Many signs of health and sexual vitality are obvious to the naked eyes. Other signs need to be deciphered. One man unraveling the sign language of sexuality is behavioral ecologist Dr. Randy Thornhill. According to Dr. Thornhill, one of the most powerful signs of sexual attraction is physical and facial symmetry. In his lab in Arizona, Dr. Thornhill uses a computer to determine the symmetry of a person's face. The facial features are plotted and marked. Then the midpoint is found for each line.
So each line has a midpoint, right? So if the two sides of the face were perfectly identical, then all the midpoints lie on the same vertical line.
The computer calculates a person's symmetry horizontally and vertically.
This eye edge here is on a different Y than is this eye edge. This one is higher than is that one. There's some asymmetry in the nose. The two sides of the nose are on slightly different planes here.
This second woman is much closer to the symmetrical ideal.
And as you can see, the midpoints on these lines line up much better than the midpoints on the lines of the more asymmetric face.
Most would agree this more symmetrical woman is more attractive. And what does even better symmetry look like?
And here's Cindy Crawford, very symmetric face for a human being.
Symmetry is an important signal of sexual attractiveness because it is a signal of health.
It occurred to me that symmetry of the body might be a very good measure of the quality of the individual, because symmetry reflects the developmental health of the individual.
For instance, if you had a weak immune system, you wouldn't be able to fight off infections, and your body would display the aftermath. Take the development of sinuses.
Sinus infections are associated with greater facial asymmetry, and the sinuses are right behind the cheekbone, so if you get an infection in your sinuses, then it's easy to imagine the effect of that on bone growth.
The sexual power of symmetry is highlighted in several studies. One showed that women with more symmetrical breasts were more fertile. Another study found that women actually become more physically symmetrical when they're ovulating. That is, their bodies alter a bit to become more attractive when they're at their most fertile. But there are limits to the effects of symmetry on a woman's sexuality.
In women, we find no indication that women's symmetry is related to the number of partners they have in a lifetime, nor the age of first sex, nor is women's symmetry related to their orgasm frequency.
On the other hand, for men, being born symmetrical is like winning the sexual sweepstakes. Studies conducted by Thornhill and others reveal that symmetrical men have bigger, taller bodies. They have more sex and start at an earlier age. They have more affairs, and both they and their partners have more orgasms. Scientists in England have found that female orgasms actually suck up semen from the vagina to the cervix. This video shows the mouth of the uterus during a female orgasm. Notice it actually dips down, vastly improving the chances for fertilization. This means greater evolutionary success for all those symmetrical men who have and bestow more orgasms.
And this is consistent with the notion that female orgasm is a female choice mechanism. So it's saving the sperm of symmetric men and bonding with symmetric men.
According to Thornhill, being symmetrical isn't just about how you look, it's also about how you smell.
We're asking you to smell shirts worn by men for 2 nights' sleep. Open the top and take a whiff, and then rate it on the basis of pleasantness, sexiness, and intensity.
This one smells like you wore my shampoo last night. Strawberries. This one smells like a locker room. No, not good.
Yeah, it does. It smells good, but not like a man.
Yeah, no, not like a man.
We have found repeatedly in 3 studies of our own and an additional study in another lab that more symmetric men smell better to women.
In other words, the guy who looks great can also smell great.
It would pay all men to smell better to females, but it's only the symmetric guys that are smelling good. So that implies that the guys who don't smell so good can't. It's not that they don't want to, they can't.
The link between the men who look good and the men who smell good is still a mystery.
It's known from physiological studies that certain scents of males are produced as byproducts of the breakdown of these male hormones, male sex hormones like testosterone. So we think that possibly there may be a connection between how good a man smells and the level of his testosterone, although that is not proven to be the case, but we think that's one way to explain the overall pattern that we have found.
We are all living in the grip of these patterns of sexual attraction. These patterns may be hardwired, but increasingly we are playing with our software to shape our own definitions of what it means to be a man or a woman or none of the above, or something in between. In the game of sexual attraction, we tend to think that there are only two players, the masculine and the feminine. But those labels are no longer enough to contain all the possibilities we are creating. Biological gender begins in the womb with a sperm and an egg. The egg contains an X chromosome. The sperm contains either an X or Y chromosome. An XX combination will bring a girl into the world. An XY combination will produce a boy. From there, the social conditioning begins.
Literally from day one, from even before day one, in the womb, people will play different music once they find out whether it's a boy or a girl. They'll talk to it in different ways.
Hang out in any playroom to see the differences. Studies show that little boys like mechanical and structural toys, and little girls go for toys with faces or toys that can be cuddled. Nature or nurture? Trying to separate biology from culture is like splitting hairs, and scientists are busy separating the strands.
I don't think humans come into the world as blank slates on which culture writes the script. We have evolved sex differences that are deeply rooted in human nature.
One basic theory is that over the course of evolution, men and women adapted different strategies for survival, strategies which are still hardwired in our brains today.
Boys and males, in order to compete successfully for mates, have to acquire resources. Often those resources required hunting. The ability, for example, to track the trajectory of a spear as it moves through time and space and intersects with a moving animal. Men are better at that ability.
Women, on the other hand, sustained their families by gathering food. The result, a totally different set of skills.
But there's another type of spatial ability, what's called spatial location memory, and this is the ability to remember where certain objects are located in your physical environment. Turns out women are better at that particular ability.
Honey, have you seen my socks?
The differences don't end there. Most rock climbers, ski jumpers, race car drivers, and high-end gamblers are male. Is this the product of reckless abandon or simple genetics?
Men are adapted to take risks to acquire resources. Those men who didn't take risks are not our ancestors.
Bus says taking risks meant more food and more attention from the ladies.
Sometimes you come back empty-handed, sometimes you come back with a big bonanza of meat, and so it's a very risky activity. And so those who come back with the big bonanzas enjoy a big boost in status. Women find them very attractive.
Our differences can be traced back to sex hormones released in the womb. But hormones shape more than just the genitals. They can shape our behavior as well. Studies with other animals illustrate the point. For songbirds, the male is the musician. He sings to advertise himself to females. When scientists injected a female songbird with male hormones, she suddenly burst into song. And speaking of music, if you're a woman, you may be ingrained with the biology to pick up on that sound more easily than a man does. The tiny hair cells in the ear that register sound waves vibrate more forcefully in women, so women's ears are tuned for intense communication. In fact, women also have a better sense of smell and touch than men. And when it comes to feelings, scientists have learned that emotions trigger more brain activity in women than men. One study concluded that boys take 7 times longer to process emotional data than girls.
A woman who's able to understand empathically the needs of her child, the desires of her child, can better care for that child. Men didn't require that particular set of skills.
So biology had its own agenda for printing off two very different templates. But it's not always so black and white. When it comes to different genders, Western culture has generally stopped counting at 2. Anything beyond that was traditionally called a freak.
The question that arises in your minds, is that man or is it woman?
What's a man is an interesting question. But we've been spinning our wheels on that one for thousands of years. What's a woman is a similar question. A more interesting question might be, why do we have to be one or the other?
Many of us ask that same question, but very few are willing to explore the consequences of the answer. Someone who is exploring this new world beyond gender is author Kate Bornstein.
What really got me started writing about gender is that I would start saying these things like, hey, you know, I'm not a man, or I'm not a woman either. And when I would say those two things together, people would go, what? And so I just needed to put it out as a language.
2 books, 3 plays, and countless lectures later, Bornstein is spreading her message.
I'm what's called a transsexual person. That means I was assigned one gender at birth, and now I live my life as something else. I was born... I do a lot of work on college campuses, and I talk with kids, and what I want them to know is that the trick to being a real man or a real woman is defining it for yourself. War going on inside me.
Bornstein ought to know. Her story began as Albert over 50 years ago. More than half of her life was spent as a man.
I knew I was not a man. Everything I read said the only other choice was woman. And most everybody agreed that women didn't have outies.
Hoping to find some kind of resolution, Bornstein underwent genital surgery. But completing the transition to womanhood only raised more questions.
The quality of graciousness might be a gendered quality for women. The quality of assertiveness might be a gendered quality for men. But they're none of them necessarily gendered. So break through.
Dee, I don't know what I am. I honestly don't. But we're checking your gender aptitude. It's a gender aptitude quiz. Question number 3, moving right along. Do you shave?
I want to be myself. I don't want to always be a mannered thing. You're a man, so you have to act this way. You're a woman, so you have to act that way. I don't want to be told that. I'm a little more complex than that, and what I have found in 51 years is I haven't met anyone else who's less complex than me.
Bornstein lives with her partner, Barbara, in New York City.
Hey, Mr. Mazzella, how are you doing? Good. Now I understand that for the most part people think I'm a woman. Mr. Mazzella saw me on television. But a lot of me is still going, you don't really think that. I'm just a guy in a dress, you know? And the piece I've been able to reach with that is that I really don't care that much what people think they see when they see me anymore. What I care about is that, for the most part, most people at least see cute.
See ya, thank you. I'm not even sure we'd still be in New York if it weren't for Hell's Kitchen. No way.
Not the way New York is changing.
Yeah.
New York is getting rid of the freaks. Get a picture of your ideal lover, the person who you really could spend the rest of your life with. And then list out all the qualities of that person. They're kind, they're strong. When you make a list like that, you go to a place where it does have nothing to do with male or female, and that is playing with gender. That's your first step into a space that isn't defined as male space or women's space.
Some cultures are more fluid with their concept of gender. In some Native American tribes, certain individuals were called two-spirited persons. They were given special status because they had access to both the male and female spirits.
In India, there's a whole group of people called the Hijra, who belong to a particular religious group, and they're all transvestites or transsexuals. They entertain at weddings. It's not just check one or the other. We talk now about gender rainbows, gender flavors.
And people like Bornstein are leading the way.
A lovely future for me is just a world where people get to express themselves, and there are harmless values, harmlessly in the world, and with a little delight.
It's Saturday night, and one of the oldest traditions in the world is preparing to take the stage. These performers embody something many of us have trouble reconciling. Biology is one thing, but gender is quite another.
A lot of it is focused on the body, but it's the way that you wear your body, the way you present your body, and the way that you act as a man or as a woman.
Gender messages are coded in popular culture, the specialty of Professor Jeff Brown.
You learn to be male or you learn to be female because you learn to act masculine or feminine, and that's how we cue to gender. You can't look at a magazine stand and not see on the cover of every issue, no matter what the magazine is, ideals of masculinity and ideals of femininity, the ways to look and the ways to behave.
While there are slight differences in biology, it seems culture tends to exaggerate and encourage them. An American study involving 300 children looked at how likely parents were to buy their kids gender-inappropriate toys. If boys asked for a soldier or dump truck, they got it 70% of the time. If they asked for a doll, they got it 40% of the time, or less. It doesn't take long for a child to figure out how this system works.
Boys get the rough and tumble behavior, women get the pretty little princess behavior, and they get dressed up in pinks or blues, and you learn it and you're constantly exposed to it.
And the exposure lasts a lifetime. The stereotypes are everywhere.
But there are specific rules of behavior for men and women in our society, and ways they're supposed to act and what they can and can't do. And I think those rules are changing. But generally, men are supposed to be strong, reserved, very analytical, whereas women are supposed to be emotional, more impulsive, more talkative.
The messages are so strong in Western culture, they can exert a major influence on behavior. Just take a look at teenagers.
You're looking around, there's a whole industry set up as to what you're supposed to look like. And you pick up teen girls magazines, they're all about the boys, how to get the guys, how to get the body, how to put on your makeup, or wear the right clothes, and so on. They're real instruction manuals, how to grow up into being the proper kind of woman. And then you graduate to the Cosmos and the Glamours and so on.
While some behaviors seem instinctive, others seem like scripts that we act out and perform.
I think one of the greatest examples of gender as being a performance is Pamela Anderson's becoming an ideal for the gay community, for drag queens.
Add some full lips, long eyelashes, some sensible walking shoes, and just about anyone can become queen for a day.
Drag queens key on and try to imitate, and I think there's a certain kinship with them because there's a recognition that gay men can be performing femininity just as a heterosexual woman is performing femininity.
A woman acting as a woman? According to Brown, it only seems bizarre because we're so used to doing it.
Students of mine have generally been resistant to the idea that gender is performance at first. After a while, they kind of get the idea that, oh, all right, because they see the artificiality of it. They see how somebody can put it on and take it off.
So the world is a stage, and small performances are going on every weekend. But the dress code has always been open to interpretation, especially now that our gender outfits are becoming more and more eclectic. But society has its limits. Look at what happened with one of male rock star Marilyn Manson's album covers.
There were cases of people defaming billboards and so on, and trying to pull records from stores because the image was so disturbing. It really begs the question of people, what is it that's bothering you about that?
While society struggles with new definitions of gender, superheroes maintain the mythic divisions. Brown's current study involves comic books.
In recent years, they've carried over to a lot more of an extreme, to a hypermasculinity. Forearms bigger than his head. This is another one, particularly macho, particularly rugged and masculine, the giant arms, the weapons.
Brown suspects that as gender lines blur, popular culture responds by holding on to the icons and bumping them up a few notches.
And at the same time that you get the hyper-masculine images, you get the hyper-feminine images that complement it, with the large breasts, but also the phallic weapons and so on.
Even female bodybuilders know that when it comes to maintaining the status quo, there's a need to accessorize.
When they get a little too muscular, they tend to go for features that will feminize them again to assuage that. So muscles combined with breast implants, with lingerie.
Pop culture struggles to reflect the shifting definitions of male and female. In the real world, this means anything goes. Traditionally, masculinity has followed some fairly specific roles. The fireman, the cop, the cowboy. What else do real men do?
There you go. Are they comfortable? They still fit?
Aiming to keep his masculinity intact is author and house husband David Eddy.
Skills of being able to shoot and punch and kick and pilot flaming jets to the ground are no longer relevant. Possible redefinition of machismo would be usefulness in the type of world that we now live in.
Done like dinner.
Some scientists claim that men are genetically programmed to acquire resources for their families. But these days, bringing home the bacon is no longer the exclusive province of men.
When we decided to have Nicholas, Pam wasn't going to give up her career. She'd been working in TV news for 10 years.
With his wife earning his keep, Eddy had to learn how to run the mothership.
It's definitely learned behavior for a man, but I would say that it's learned behavior for a woman too. It's just that women have always been willing to learn it, and men are like, oh, I don't know how to do this, honey. You know, it's like, how long did they get away with that? See, I caught him though. That's important.
He wrote a book about crossing the gender lines and suffering the consequences.
I think perhaps it's this nurturing quality, like the idea of a man nurturing a child. It doesn't even sit well with me, and I'm like, you know, a complete example of somebody who's done it.
Towards a possible redefinition of machismo.
I spend a lot of time in the kitchen. I almost always have a sink full of soapy water and often a pot full of boiling water going at the same time. Ugh. I mop and sweep, apologizing to Nick.
Eddy argues that the modern office is no place for the Marlboro man anyway.
As soon as I'm finished, I just have to do this.
It's not like men are rustling cattle in their workplaces. They're tapping on a keyboard. And you know, meanwhile, people who are staying home with kids, men and women alike, are like wrestling strollers up and down staircases. You know, there's a lot more manual labor involved in staying at home with a kid than there is going to an office.
Good one, thank you.
But what would our ancestors think?
Deep within my DNA lurks the urge to go out in the morning and return with something, a bloody carcass slung over my shoulder, or at least something fuzzy and dead on the end of a pointy stick. But, you know, I can get over that. I'm just a transitional figure. And in fact, I think in the future, it'll be about sharing money-earning duties and sharing household duties. There are biological differences, but I'd say that going with them is not always the best way to go.
And increasingly, more and more of us are no longer cruising down the old two-lane gender highway. We're rewriting the rules of the road, painting over the signposts, and heading somewhere we haven't even defined yet. In the process, we're going to redefine the masculine and the feminine, which means we're going to redefine what we find sexy and who we find sexy.